In this video, I'm refurbishing an Honor 20 for a friend. The rear glass and screen have shattered, so they need to be replaced. While I'm at it, we're also replacing the battery and rear camera that was damaged. First, I'll apply some heat to the back glass. I had to use a razor blade to get under the glass initially because it is really tight against the rim of the chassis. I don't recommend using razor blades for this, as there is a great risk to hurt yourself in the process. I used very little force and used it only to make the initial separation for the glass before switching to a plastic tool. Due to the damage, the glass split as I pried at it. This means glass was all over my work area. I wasn't worried about further damage to the back glass as my friend ordered a replacement anyway. After the initial separation, it took minimal force to move around the back glass panel. I had to add some tape to stop the glass from shattering all over my hands. Once the back glass is removed, the next step is to remove all the screws. They are all easy to access. After this, the plastic panel can be removed and placed to the side. We couldn't find a replacement of this part, so I plan to reuse this panel for the new display and chassis. Now that all the connectors are exposed, I can disconnect all the components from the motherboard. Firstly, the battery should be disconnected, followed by the others in any order. A few of the connectors have a weird angle to pry against the board, so just be aware of that and try to use plastic tools to work on the phone to minimize the risk of damage. Now the battery needs to be removed. This is not an easy task given the strength of the adhesive used here. If you plan to replace the screen, I recommend purchasing a new battery, as it is very likely you will bend or damage the original battery when removing it from the chassis. Since I'm replacing the screen, I went ahead and used the hairdryer to warm up the adhesive under the battery. I don't recommend heating the top of the battery as it's not safe. With the battery out, you can clear up the adhesive inside the chassis to get access to the flex cables, which connect the motherboard and charging port. There's a cable in the middle for the LCD display. Since my friend bought a display already connected to a chassis, I was able to leave this as it was. If you're brave enough to do an LCD replacement and keep the chassis that you already have, you need to remove the cable from the glue. There's a fingerprint scanner on the power button, which is held in place by 2 screws and a piece of metal. The flex cable runs under the battery up to the motherboard, so unstick it from the chassis. Then slide out the fingerprint scanner by pushing it out from the phone. Now we are in the transplant phase, as I won't reuse this chassis, so all the internal components need to come out, including motherboard, IR blaster, speaker, antenna and cameras. I removed the camera array, and off camera I replaced the broken lenses, with a new unit in the array. After that, I was able to lift the motherboard up and out of the chassis. It has some areas which are pushing into the body of the phone, so lift gently and slide it out. Now the last components can be switched across. I did the IR blaster first, then the speaker which just needed to be laid into the new chassis and aligned with some small contact areas. Then I moved on to the charging port and lower speaker, which are held in place with adhesive. Just lift carefully and it will come out. The motherboard has thermal paste applied between it and the display side of the phone for cooling. I washed off the old paste as it's not effective to reuse it, and I applied some cheap CPU thermal paste I had laying around, so the new chassis would have the same cooling ability. The motherboard can go into the new chassis now, followed by the charging port and speaker. Then the antenna wire goes back into the crevice running along the inside of the body and connected to the speaker board and motherboard. Then the camera array goes back into place, and all the connectors clip in. Now the fingerprint scanner goes back into place. Check that it goes clicky clicky before fixing it back into place with the screws. The new chassis has pre-applied adhesive. The new display cable can be laid down first, carefully aligned so the battery will fit. Then the main flex cable goes back into place, followed by the flex cable for the fingerprint scanner, so everything is nice and tidy for the battery to be laid on top. When the battery is in place and all the connectors are clicked in, you can test boot the device and check all the components work correctly. That way you can make adjustments or replacements to any components that aren't working. Usually you can just unclip connectors and reseat them to solve issues. Because the plastic cover bent during the removal process, I used some light adhesive to get it back into place. Then I put back all the screws so that when the back glass is placed on, the phone will be completely level as it was before. I used isopropyl alcohol to swab away old adhesive from the frame. Then I transplanted all the foam protection from the old back glass to the new back glass to protect the camera array. I recommend using more adhesive for the back glass regardless if it has a sticker applied or not, so it won't fall out later. My friend preferred that I used only the sticker, so I just left it that way. I pressed all the glass to make sure it was level, then gave the phone a quick charger test. If you have clips or clamps, I recommend to use them and leave the phone for 24 hours to completely set. With all that done, the phone is in great working condition and looks like new again.